What becomes possible when a health system decides physician well-being is a strategic priority rather than a personal responsibility? That's what we're talking about today. If you're a doctor, healthcare leader, or patient, you belong here. I'm Kim Downey, and this is Stand Up for Doctors Conversations at the Intersection of Connection, Courage, and the Future of Healthcare. This episode is sponsored by Brian Case at Direct Wealth Care, helping physicians navigate the financial stress no one talks about in medicine with conflict-free tools and resources. And I would like to welcome Dr. Jillian Bybee and Dr. Kristin Jacob. Thanks for joining us today, Jillian and Kristin.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And by way of introduction, Dr. Jillian Bybee is a pediatric ICU physician who believes that professional success shouldn't come at the cost of your well-being. Jillian collaborates with the Office of Graduate Medical Education and her health systems well-being team to design and implement programming that supports organizational wellness. And Dr. Kristin Jacob is an internal medicine pediatrics physician and healthcare leader who collaborates with Jillian and is focused on advancing physician and APP well-being at a systems level, helping organizations move beyond individual resilience to drive meaningful system-wide change. And I love the work that you're both doing, and it's so important, and it's so important to share and replicate, and that's why I'm looking forward to having you both on today. And I would like you to share what you'd most like our audience to know about you as we begin our conversation. Kristin, would you like to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Kristin Jacob, I'm a practicing primary care physician. I do outpatient internal medicine and pediatrics. I also am a mom of three. So, my kids are 11, 9, and 7. And definitely that I think a lot about just how do we care for ourselves with these multi-dimensional roles. And I think what I'd love the audience to know about myself is that that journey is ongoing for all of us. I think so many of us that have shown up to well-being work and are so passionate about it is because we are continuing to learn for ourselves, for those that we're serving, our patients, for our families. And I'm so grateful for this work because it's given me so many insights to thrive in medicine, where there's definitely been periods of my career where that wasn't true. Right now, I've been revisiting through my kids being school age, I have this amazing opportunity to get into new hobbies along with them. So I'm back into bike riding, which I really had not been prioritizing. I'm back into using my Spanish. My kids have been really into learning Spanish, and then back into reading books, which, when your kids are really little, that takes a back seat a bit. But those are three things I love and had been really important to me before I got into medicine. So it's really nice to go back to like that person before and revisit those hobbies.
Well, thank you for sharing all of that. I love it. And in part that you're sharing that it's a journey. And even though you're doing this work, right, that you don't have it all figured out, and it kind of right goes in waves, right? And so I love your honesty in sharing that, and also your hobbies. And we say often, and it's one of the chapters in our most recent book, sometimes you have to feel better outside medicine to feel better inside medicine. So thank you for sharing all of that. And Jillian, what would you like us to know about you today?
Well, I'm a pediatric critical care physician along with all of those other things. And I think that speaks to the fact that I'm an incredibly detail-oriented person, but also a really curious person. And so my whole life has been about trying to figure out how things work and then also how to make things better. And so that landed me in a career that I really love. But like Kristin just said, it also resulted in burnout for me. I had burnout when I was a pediatric ICU fellow, and then I also had burnout when I was an early career faculty member. And I think a lot of that was exactly like you just said, Kim, and Kristin was alluding to. It was through being a one-dimensional person where I had over-indexed and invested in my medical career and then forgotten all of those things that really made me a human being. And so that is what the journey has been for me. And I, teach people how to do this, but I'm certainly not an expert. I'm just like to say that I'm a few steps ahead of the process because I learned things the hard way. And I am in the process of trying to figure out what that looks like for me. And then I teach what I need to learn. So the reason that I blog and podcast and do the work that we both do inside of our organization is because it selfishly gives me the opportunity to remind myself self of the things I most need to know.
That's so important. Yeah, and that's the greatest teacher, right? And sometimes when you learn it for yourself, and that's how you can best teach it to other people. Experience, nothing beats personal experience. And so as we move into like our opening question, I did want to take just a moment to share, like when we say the words burnout and resilience, that doesn't ring for a lot of physicians, right? They think we should say moral injury instead of burnout, and that they, you're some of the most resilient people on the planet. So what I've shared in other episodes is there is a difference between burnout and moral energy, moral injury, right? And also resilience can mean moving through a challenging time and coming out stronger. So it's not about asking you to be more resilient. And how I was phrasing our opening question is that physicians have spent years being offered resilience training, mindfulness, and self-care strategies. However, we know that physician burnout and moral injury isn't primarily a resilience problem, it's a systems problem, and you're both doing wonderful work in that. Jillian, would you like to share a bit?
Sure. So, one of my favorite things to do is speak publicly. And so, one of my talks is actually called More Than Pizza and Yoga. And it's about those systems based solutions. But interestingly, also, as someone who does a lot of graduate medical education work, it turns out that people really do like both yoga and pizza. And being fed really is a helpful solution as long as you have those other parts. And so, I think like you're doing, Kim, with this podcast, and Kristin has started in our organization, it's through actually making systems change by making things more efficient, by listening to people. Once you start doing that, you can give them resilience trainings by way of a way to get stress out. And I love how you phrase that because something I talk a lot about is our misunderstanding of what resilience is. It's not being unaffected by the things that we go through. It's really how do we take those experiences, understand how we are affected by them, and then how do we turn that into something else on the other side of it. And I think that is the work that I try to do is how do I take my own experiences of hardship, both inside and outside of medicine, and use those lessons that I've learned, not only to make myself better, but also, like I was saying with my curiosity, to say, how can we make this place better for all of the people that work inside of it?
You shared so many points already. And yoga, one doctor, the first time I talked to her, she told me yoga saved her life. So, to your point that everybody that's become kind of trite about the yoga and the pizza parties, but to your point, not that that is the answer and to tell people do more yoga or here's a pizza, but at the same time, for some people, doing yoga is very helpful, right? And
Right.
sometimes if you have to eat and there's no food and you're hungry and somebody shows up with a pizza, you're not going to turn down a slice of pizza, right? So
Absolutely.
yeah, I love the way that you say that. And also part of it, I think what you're sharing too is about building trust, right? And it's that you're not just trying to offer the yoga and the pizza, or say call it resilience training. You're trying to get to the root of what doctors and your other healthcare professionals really need to thrive. And once that trust is built, then maybe you can use some of those other words. And actually, it was Wayne Sotil who shared that on one of our episodes about resilience and what resilience can really mean. So, Kristen, what does this bring up for you?
Yeah, what comes up for me is adding on to what Jill stated about how this truly is a both and. So a lot of, from the get-go of when we started this work at an organizational level, we really liked the Stanford organizational well-being model, which focuses on the culture of well-being, focusing on efficiency of work, and then individual factors, which includes the personal resilience. In my experience with this, it's been almost keeping that consistent, making sure that language is truly defining it and getting that into the vernacular of our organization of what we mean when we define well-being, because so many people are showing up with their own understandings or definitions of well-being. So that's been really important. And I think for when we're often talking to leaders or non-physician colleagues, we need to be really clear about that point about resilience. But almost on the flip side, when we're talking to our colleagues, we have to remind them that yes, we are incredibly resilient, and there is still value in recognizing that we are a product of our training. We are a product of those well-worn neural pathways that make us perfectionists and self-sacrificers, that we take care of ourselves last, and it's not serving us anymore. And so that's why we can see so much progress and improvement for individuals at a well-being standpoint when they do start to get to not the surface level, though again, I'm a firm believer in meditation and yoga and have become so much more of a believer through my work in well-being. But it's getting to those deeper levels as well. So it absolutely needs to be a both and looking at the work environments in which the individuals are working, plus us investing in ourselves and our teams at the local level.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, we all know the system needs to change, and we're going to be talking about some of that today. And also, though, what you were just alluding to, and I say that all the time as well, is in the meantime, we can't wait for the system to change, that there are things individuals can do to shore themselves up, which could be called resilient, right? So without getting hung up on the words, Jillian, would you like to share a story, either a personal story or a general story about how your work has helped, a physician in your organization, or a story that speaks to what you're actually doing in this work?
Yeah, so there are a lot of different ways that I could go with that. I think one of the things that we talk about at our organization, and I think we know, is that if you're a leader, sharing your own experience with your struggles can be really helpful and powerful. And one of the things that's hard for people is confusing being vulnerable with, disclosing everything or the things that you should bring to therapy. And so when I had depression and burnout when I was a fellow, I had experience where I was having passive suicidal ideation that I did not realize. And so several years ago now, I actually shared that story at a grand rounds. It was the first time I've ever talked about it publicly. And of course, all the pediatrics trainees were there since I'm a pediatrician first. And one of the people who raised his hand to not ask a question, but tell a story at the end of the talk actually happened to be one of our new interns. It was August. And he told a story of how 2 days before my talk, one of his friends at a different program had died by suicide. And so I had not planned to make my whole career about disclosing my own experience with mental illness and building a career of other system supports around it. But as soon as he shared that story, I knew that I was going to be doing it for the rest of the time that I was practicing and perhaps even beyond, because obviously we still hear stories of this. And that's a very dramatic example of how this is touching people. But I think the fact that not only was he comfortable sharing that, I followed up with him afterwards. And because Kristin actually, when she had this role, in addition to her role that she does now, because she had started an opt out program for our trainees, that trainee actually had his first opt out session coming up the following week. So he already felt really supported by institutional structures. And he was really happy that I reached out to him. But I think that's how the personal and the program can go together. We can do those things as individuals, but then also when we have programs that support people, that's how it really works together.
Yes, that is critically important. And as Dr. Michael Hirsch, my physician coach, has shared, speaking to being vulnerable, it doesn't mean I have to tell you everything, right? There's levels and layers of vulnerability. And I recently had on a physician and lawyer, both in long-term recovery from addiction, and they gave really honest shares that it isn't always rainbows and unicorns when you share your story, right? And it's important for each person to decide when they're ready to tell their story. Is it appropriate to tell their story? And you can't control other people's actions, right? Or responses to your story. So there are a lot of things to consider, but that telling your story when you feel safe and comfortable or ready it's courageous and it can change lives and save lives. So thank you for sharing that. And Kristin, what kind of story would you like to share today?
Yeah, well, I'd love to share a story that came up just this morning, actually. I was meeting with a colleague of ours, a practicing physician who is actually go midway through getting certified as a coach himself. And he shared with me that about a year ago, he was seriously considering leaving the organization. He had job applications in, he was getting his finances together. He was feeling disenchanted. He was struggling. And then he went through one of our group coaching programs and he spent 3 months with a cohort of other colleagues, led in many of the sessions led by Dr. Jill Bybee. And he said that it so changed his perspective about himself, so many deep insights that had helped him both inside and outside of work. But what kept him in our organization was that he truly started to see that there was more support at an organizational level for the well-being of physicians and APPs, which felt like a big shift. And it was at the same time when we had been able to grow our team, more resources had been deployed to kind of where he was, the region that he was practicing in, a number of different things coming out simultaneously from an organizational support and well-being standpoint. And he decided to stay with the organization and now is going back to get certified as a coach because he wants to pass this on to other people. It had been so life-changing and career-changing for him that he feels like he wants to give back in that way. So impactful to hear just one person's story about how, truly changed the trajectory and then that motivation to want to share those insights that had were so important to them.
That is a wonderful example, and many physicians, when they were experiencing distress, fully understandably during the pandemic, and sought help, whether through therapy or coaching. And then a number of doctors did go on to become coaches themselves because it changed everything. So physicians who aren't yet that familiar with coaching feel like, well, the system is the problem, right? That I don't need it's not me myself. If the system doesn't change, things aren't going to get better. So I love that example that you share, and there's so many of them, the doctors sharing their story related to that. So if you both want to share maybe a little more specifics of examples as far as like what can medicine look like when physician well-being is built into the system instead of squeezed into your free time. So Jill, if you wanted to share a little like specifically about your program. So if a doctor is kind of unsure listening to this.
Yeah, so there are a lot of different entry points to our programs, and Kristin is the biggest expert in those because she has been designing them for more years than me. But, when I think about the trainee part of our organization, there's lots of different ways that they can get access. So, we know that trainees have a busy schedule. And so, one of the things that we offer is a way to try to entice them to get into well-being by having quarterly wellness meetings. And so I try to really use those as the wellness director to say, what's your trainee experience? What do you like that's going well in the organization? What could be better? And that's in addition to twice a year wellness curriculum sessions. And, sometimes people hear wellness curriculum session and they roll their eyes, or, they don't want to go to a mandatory well-being training because they would really like time away. And while I understand that, because as a trainee, I didn't want to go to mandatory sessions, which I often went to post call from a 30-hour shift. But these sessions that we try to offer here are sessions that offer a little bit of learning, but also dialogue. And I think what we've seen in doing these sessions twice a year for the last 5 years, and now we have every program in my region doing them. Everybody did two this year. And almost overwhelmingly, the response is positive because they're so happy that a faculty member has taken time out of their schedule to come and talk about these topics. This year, we talked about depression, but also supporting people in burnout. We have lots of other different topics that we go through as well. And it allows them to talk to their peers. So if you're a first year trainee, you get to talk to someone that's more senior than you about what's your experience? How have you navigated this? And maybe see that you're not the only one dealing with it and there's a path through it. And then, as that sort of more experienced person, you get the opportunity of mentoring people junior to you, which I hear from a lot of them is really helpful to them. So, those are our sessions. But this year, excitingly, because our team is growing and we've been able to integrate more at a system level, we also piloted a resident and fellow group coaching curriculum. And, that was a small group of people because obviously it relies on people who self select in. They have to meet in their free time in the evening, which is limited, but they had the option to do both group sessions and also one on one sessions. And the feedback was overwhelmingly positive from those who were able to go. So I'm really excited to see how that's going to grow in the coming year.
That's fantastic. And it's normalizing these discussions, right?
Yep.
Because doctors are human and any struggle any human has, doctors have too. So creating the time and space and normalizing it, and a couple things you spoke to are the things that I say all the time, or that it's okay not to be okay, right? That you want to get help, but if you're struggling, that's okay, like that it's normal to struggle, right? It's not just you, you're never alone, and there's always a path forward. So I love that you were reflecting that. And Kristin, what would you like to add?
Yeah, I think that Jill mentioned how our system-wide well-being program has multiple different entry points. So coaching, we have a body of programs around coaching, one-to-one confidential mental health support, team support, peer support, and crisis support, and kind of a body of education around trauma-informed leadership and trauma-informed practices. And so we have really been able to create a wide variety of ways for people to be supported, and that is so important. And we continue to gain speed with the education and awareness that we know best spreads by word of mouth. And we continue to tell the story of how to get upstream of those drivers. So starting, really getting into what does it mean to uncover the true systemic drivers of burnout that are leading teams to this. And I think there's a few key things that we've learned. One, that we truly do need to uncover those, shine the light on that through organizational measurement and looking at the highest levels. And at the same time, our leaders at every single level do have so much more control than they might be able to see in their day to day. One of the biggest challenges of working in a large healthcare organization is we so often hear that term, that loss of autonomy, that cog in the wheel. It is just so ubiquitous often, that sentiment. And we have been able to really see that when we have the right environments, the right levels of support, the right leadership training centered on a wellness centered leadership approach where we're caring for the people first, then the relationships, and then inspiring change. When we look and when we also look at it through the lens of like what is within the scope of control, that's where we start to see thriving teams. And so I'm excited to continue to move into the work where we are shining the light on teams that are thriving, that have mastered these skills and are cultivating organizational well-being at a team-based level. Our team's been working on developing a lot of resources to arm our leaders with those skill sets. They're different skill sets than physician and APP and clinician leaders learned in clinical training, actually. So there's a lot of opportunity there. But when we start to get to those drivers of around well-being and burnout, we really need to look at the work unit level and invest there in a different way than I think we have before.
I love that. The people first, right? It's
Mhm.
all about the people, and you have to take care of the people who work in your organization so they can take care of the patients. That is like 100% true. And also, I often share as well, of course, a big driver is loss of autonomy, but simultaneously, each individual does have more control than they think they do. And some of a few good questions to ask are, is that true? Is it really true? Is the opposite also true? I learned that from Dr. Michael Hirsch as well, right? And so those are fantastic examples. So as we're starting to wind down, it sounds great. And some doctors listening might be like, oh, I wish I worked for that organization. So like, what can you share? How can we replicate this? Like, if a doctor was listening, what can they do for themselves? What can they bring to their system? How can we, or on a broader basis, spotlight what your organization is doing for more systems to engage them in this work?
Well, the first thing I would say is we always have jobs, so you could come and work with us. Just kidding. Um, so I will say that our system looks a lot different than when I joined 9 years ago. Our team is much larger. It's a formal team that didn't exist when I first got here. And so there are always ways that we as individuals can start inside of the little ecosystem that we find ourselves in. And the best place you start, like you said, Kim, is with yourself. So for me, when I left fellowship and came to this organization, I was like, oh, I've left burnout behind. But you know what? I didn't leave behind workaholism and perfectionism and my imposter syndrome and the overdoing in order for me to feel worthy. I didn't leave any of that behind. And it came to find me in my new job. And so I think one of the things that we can do is start to invest in ourselves and our own growth, even in an organization that invests in people the way ours does, which I am grateful for. I tell people that no one will care about your well-being more than you do. And so if you don't invest in it, you won't get the benefits from it because no one knows what you need more than you do. So take a little bit of time, think about what you might need. If that happens to be looking for another job, don't just go running to that job because you will bring the same things with you. And so you need to examine to find what those things are. And then there are lots of different coaches out there. I coach outside the organization. There's lots of different physician coaching organizations. Just start talking to people and see, could this be something that's helpful for me? And start to invest in yourself. A lot of times when people see you doing that, they want a piece of what you have. You're also able to bring yourself into your workplace better. And once I was able to do that and start communicating my message, everyone around me was like, hey, can you come and talk about these things before our team even existed?
hmm That's so well said. Start with yourself. And there's that phrase, you take yourself with you wherever you go. So when you think just changing jobs is the answer, and then you find out that over time, right, you end up with the same struggles if you haven't done the work, that deep work that
Yeah,
we
exactly.
all need to do at some point. I've lived that. I get it. And also, I love what you're saying. And Dr. Charity Hicks has shared this about like running towards something instead of away from something. So making it the best it can where you are first. And from that place, then deciding, do I want to leave? Or sometimes, is Kristen, when you share with that physician, that's I think what he thought he or she was going to try to run away. But then through figuring these things out, realize, sometimes the grass isn't always greener. Kristen?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, in addition to what Jill had mentioned, if I'm thinking about someone who wants to get started, two things come up for me. It is at the local level, how can you authentically check in with others? What's that small act you can do every day to start to move the needle around the culture just for those around you? And I think we've really done a lot of education around how this doesn't need to look like a massive time investment. This might just be the organic every week committing to authentically checking in on a colleague, authentically recognizing someone that you are working with, pausing before you walk into that door to, walk through that door to see that patient. And at the end of the day, thinking about, what went well, what am I grateful for, returning to those values. So there are things that we can do just amongst ourselves and our teams. I think the second point is if somebody is interested in learning more, getting started, is starting to learn more about the field, where we are now as compared to 15, 20 years ago, and then just the national landscape of healthcare worker well-being is much further along. And the organizations like the National Academy of Medicine, the American Medical Association, there's so many good resources out there to understand case studies of what organizations are doing. The AMA Steps Forward program gives fantastic, great examples for frontline practical changes to make. So I think it's so helpful to understand what is going well in other systems. It can't always be applied perfectly to your own organization, but those idea sharing is incredibly helpful to see.
Absolutely. And the checking in with others helps you and them, right? So it
Hmm.
helps you make that if you decide that you're going to do that and once a day or once a week, I'm going to ask somebody not only or how you doing or how are you really doing, or just ask a real question and really be able to listen for the answer. It's building those connections. That's what it's all about is real connections, and it helps both of you. So thank you for sharing. And if our listeners want to get in touch with you or find more about your organization and what they're doing, how can they do that?
So for me, I have a website. It's JillianBybeeMD.com. Look at me getting my own website wrong. But also, I write a blog on Substack called Humans Leading because, like you said, we're all human beings. And I have to remind myself every day that I don't have to be perfect. I just have to be whatever version of myself I am that day. I also have a podcast called Humans Leading. You can find both of those on my website, and then I'll let Kristin talk about her.
Yeah, so best way is probably through LinkedIn. I have contact information on there as well.
Well, thank you very much. And do you have a one sentence take home action message you can each share with our audience?
Hmm.
So I know that this episode and your great work that you're doing, Kim, are centered on what systems and organizations can do. And that is great. But like we've talked about, those things take a long time to change. And so I was actually coaching someone yesterday who was describing this frustration in her organization, and she felt like she was losing her sanity. And ultimately, at the end of our conversation, we had reached the point where she realized that the lever she needed to pull for her sanity was in her personal life. It was to let go of some of that angst about the workplace and the need to drive the change forward, and to think about in this phase of her life, how can she really enjoy all of the vacations that she has planned with her wife and children coming up this summer. So that's the one thing, is it's okay to focus on system change, but the number one thing that you can do is take some time for yourself today, and even a few seconds can be really helpful.
For sure. Thanks. Kristen?
Yeah, somewhat similarly, I'd love to leave everyone with just the belief that every single one of us is empowered to improve our own well-being and the well-being of especially those around us through those connection points. And again, I think that helps us take back so much of that agency that can sometimes feel lost in large healthcare organizations. And seeing all of that as a way to move the needle at the system level. That's true organic culture change, which single-handedly is one of the most important things that we can do to change our healthcare systems.
Well, thank you. And thank you again for being my guest today. I'm really looking forward to sharing this with
Yeah,
our
thanks
audience.
for having
Yeah,
us.
You're
absolutely.
welcome. And thank you for being part of our Stand Up for Doctors Global Neighborhood, a place where physicians and those who care about them can connect, empower, recharge, and celebrate. You'll find more stories like this in our White Coats book series. And if you're a doctor, we'd love to welcome you to our inaugural physician retreat this October, where these conversations can continue in person. Would be honored to have you join us. And if you'd like to help sustain this podcast, please consider sponsoring an episode or connecting us with a mission aligned sponsor. Links are in the show notes, including how to reach out to our guests. And in closing, to move the needle in healthcare, we all need to raise our voices and we all need to care about each other. We already know that doctors need to care about patients. Patients need to care about doctors too. So stand up, doctors, and let's stand up for doctors.